Excellent. All right, let's look at our agenda for today and welcome a few quick updates for you at the beginning of our presentation. Then we'll be kind of excited to give you an update on the alternate assessment, and then hopefully just saving as much time as we can to talk about the new early literacy screening guidance, and as always, as much time as we can at the end of the meeting for questions and answers. I just want to point out we have recently released our education vision, and from the introduction, some really key terms that we've underlined here for you today to be thinking about what it is that DESE is working towards, having happen all across our state. And then, just a little bit more about the vision itself. And this is what I hope you hear from us and all of our colleagues here at DESE, is that we're working to make sure that all of our students are known and valued, that the classroom experience includes work, assignments, projects that are relevant, real world, and interactive. And here's where I think special education particularly comes in, but really at all levels, that to get there, we need to be providing individualized supports that really enable students to go to get to grade level or beyond, and beyond, which I think is so important. So I just hope you keep hearing about this like a mantra, so that this is the change that we hope to inspire within all of our schools in the state. Well, let's jump into some updates really quickly. So Jamie, excited to have you here to kick us off to talk about the resolution funds for next year.
Okay, just a couple of quick updates this morning. Just a reminder about the year 3 resolution funds, fund code 240 only. Letters already have went out, so if you did not get your letter, just make sure that you email us and we'll make sure that you have that information. We do have the list of LEAs that are receiving resolution funds publicly posted, so that's the link, so you can check on that if you have any questions. And then just a quick thing, I know that there's a lot of questions about GEMS. And we actually are going to send out a checklist to help you get prepared for the 1st of July when the new system will be going live. It'll be the very beginning of GEMS. But for the resolution funds, you will not be emailing that to us, the affirmation like you normally do. That will be submitted through the GEMS system. So when the GEMS system is live, you can't get into it right now. You'll upload your written affirmation. There'll be a spot, you'll be able to see it. It's pretty easy to find, but we'll also be providing you some information. So just want you to be prepared for that. We can go to the next slide, Russell. Okay, so coordinated pandemic-related transition services. I know we've talked about this a lot. So these next couple of slides are just information that we've already shared about what they are. We'll move into the next slide. Just a reminder of the agencies that we're working with to provide some services for students that are eligible for these services. But the real thing that we really want to talk about today is we have an ask for all of you. We still are really trying to work to make sure that students that are eligible are able to access these services. So if you have questions about who from your district is eligible, you can go to the Dropbox to get that information. We have a new flyer that also gives information about what this is. You can click on that link, it's translated. And in addition, I think you all know that we've been working with the Federation. This particular link or the QR code that's on the flyer is something that you can give to families. They can click on it. It gives them the ability to provide their information to the Federation. The Federation will reach out to them and direct them to the right agency based on what the services are that they need. But the ask today is we really need help from all of you spreading this information, giving it to different places in your community that might be able to help us locate students that are eligible for these services.
And Jimmy, I just want to chime in super fast there. Just a reminder that in case you're new to this, that these are students who've aged out of special education. So we'll call them young adults who've aged out of special education. You're the only entity that might have the last best address for them. And so that's really why we're asking you to help just get this flyer back out. We know there are just too many young people sitting at home, not taking advantage of adult services. This is one way in is to take advantage of these coordinated post-pandemic transition services. And so just really just soliciting your support and your help in reaching out to families, to young people to get them engaged. But thanks, Jamie. I'll go to the indicator 7 slide.
Okay, again, just a reminder, the deadline for indicator 7 submission is August 31st, but we just want to make sure that you know that the ECOS database is open. Information that you'll need will be located in there. I think you all know that you are required, every district is required to submit your entry data and your exit data. We can go on to the next one, Russell. This last slide just gives you some information and some links. This is not new information, but we just want to make sure that you have this accessible so that you have what you need to submit your data by the end of August. If you have questions, reach out. Feel free to reach out. We provided contact information for our technical assistance providers that can answer any specific questions that you have regarding the ECOS database.
Excellent, excellent.
That's it.
Thanks, Jamie. And appreciate all of your work across the state in terms of uploading the Indicator 7 data that we need. So just a couple of quick updates on the IEP improvement project. Just to start with, we want to make sure that you're aware that anything that we do to update materials, information is always available on our website. So the form itself, the meeting invitation, the administrative information page, they're all updated, all on that website. And I really appreciate Julie putting in the link in the chat, the links to everything that you need, including this one. A couple of just looking back before we look ahead. So we've done our training of trainers program, our symposium on May 31st and June 1st for the districts that plan, schools and districts that plan to adopt the new IEP next year. Really appreciate everyone's participation in that meeting and excited for your rollout plans for next school year. Again, just for your reference, in terms of what we have done, we had another meeting with vendors. We had a vendor office hour session on June 8th, very well attended, lots of good questions. And we hope that we're continuing to support the vendors in their the adaptations that they need to make to their IT solutions for you. So just wanted you to know that that was our second meeting. We've done 2 of those now, and hopefully just getting the questions answered that they need to provide you with the service that you need. We also held another office hour session on June 15th. And speaking of office hours, just as we look ahead, just a reminder that we'll continue to offer office hours during the 23-24 school year. Also, though we don't have dates yet, we will later this summer for the training of trainer session, the symposium that we'll hold next fall for all of the districts that are implementing during the 24-25 school year. So just, stay alert. We'll have more information for you about those training sessions. They will be full day and in person and regionally based. Later this summer, we will be producing the process guide, sample IEPs, and a crosswalk between the old IEP and the new IEP, but really based on your request. We've heard a lot of requested need for that, and we want to make sure we provide those for you later on this summer. We are now really engaged in training mode for other entities that might need to know more about the new IEP. So for example, or entities, organizations, individuals, there's always people work. So these are people behind all of these categories here. So we're doing training for our own DESE staff members. What does our problem resolution team need to know about the new IEP, our public school monitoring team, our charter school office. So those will be happening later on this summer. Our state agency partners, DMH, DDS, DCF, DYS, will be holding a session with our partner agencies later on this summer. We're also working really closely with the BSEA. We have trainings plural scheduled with the BSEA for this summer. We will be announcing a training session for advocacy organizations, and our professional organization partners like MASC and MASS will also be meeting with them this summer. So we internally here at DESE are going to be pretty busy just working with other groups to help them understand how to implement the new IEP while also preparing everything that you need, especially for the start of next school year. The final update for you just briefly is just a reminder that the U.S. Department of Education put out guidance about confronting racial discrimination in student discipline. Highly recommend for you to take a look at it. Let me just tell you how the guidance is formatted. It basically takes all of the information that the Office for Civil Rights put together in the way of the cases that they have had over the past several years, which kind of reads like, what to avoid. If you read the guidance document, it's sort of a district by district, the types of findings that OCR had. It's easy to follow, easy to read, a good point for just questioning ourselves about what practices we have. And so those 14 school districts in 10 states really just gives a description of each one. But, I want to pause for a second as we get fully assembled here. I see about 240 participants today. I'm really excited that today we have general education practitioners and special education practitioners. We have our special education leaders who've also in many cases invited their curriculum directors to join them today. And it's really that last bullet point that, I think really helps to bring special education and general education together. are those fact sheets and webinars that the U.S. Department of Education has put out. And there are some good resources around things like how to run an effective student support team, which is one of those topics that brings general education and special education together. And, when I looked at it, I thought this isn't, breaking new ground, but like so many good things in life, it's simple ingredients done well, right? So it's like, what are the kind of the building blocks, those fundamentals we need to have for things like student support teams in order to be effective for educators and students. And so I hope that you find those fact sheets useful. The webinars that they have are coming up this summer and fall, so maybe something to look forward to and to delve into a little bit further. The very final thing that I have is our next special education leaders meeting is August 18th. We did get a little feedback to say, could we not do it on a Friday? I've made the decision to keep it on this date because we're really hoping to have as many of the resources related to the new IEP ready for you as possible. And I just want to make sure we have every day to make sure that they're of the highest quality that we bring to you. We always record these meetings, we always post them. So if you are taking a vacation day on August 18th, please just tune in a little while later, the next week when we post them so that you can catch up on what we release related to the new IEP on August 18th. So we're hoping to have things like the process guide, the sample IEPs, the crosswalk in time for this meeting. I stress hoping to. All right, let's go on to our first key topic for today, which is really an update on the MCAS alt eligibility guidelines. And I'm really pleased to introduce our new manager of inclusive assessment, Robert Pelliciotti. Robert, do you want to just give yourself a quick introduction and then take us into the information?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Robert Pelliciotti, as Russell mentioned, and for the past several years, I've worked in inclusive assessment. I provided information on accommodations for students with disabilities, helped manage the information regarding alternate forms for the MCAS test, as well as provided guidance for the portfolio appeal process or MCAS appeals process, so students can have an alternate way to receive their CD and graduate. As part of that transition, I'm now working with our MCAS alt coordinator, Deborah Hand, and our other member of our team, which is Melanie Menaris, who manages the access test. As Deb manages MCAS alt, so we are working together and making sure we're providing as much information to everyone, all schools, special education teachers on required assessments for students, all students. So I appreciate Russell giving me the opportunity to speak with everyone today. We want to talk about some important updates, changes to the MCAS alt. As everyone may have realized over the past several years, ESSA requires, every Student Succeeds Act, requires some changes to accountability regarding students taking the alternate assessment. This is the alternate assessment for students with the most significant disabilities. Previously, there wasn't a cap on the number of students that could take it. This is a statewide cap. There was a cap on percentage of students that could be accounted for proficient, but there wasn't a cap on the number of students that could take the MCAS alt, the alternate assessment. However, with ESSA, they made changes to that. The state has a 1% cap of students that could be considered eligible for the MCAS alternate assessment. And we must go through the data and provide guidance on making sure students are appropriately assigned to this, because when students are assigned an alternate assessment, it means this may delay or prevent them from graduating and get a high school diploma. So we're required to take a look at that. And as part of that, we have to make some updates to how students are assigned and provide some additional guidance. Move on to the next slide. So the Office of Special Education Programs from the Department of Education provided some information to us that we have to share and work together with stakeholders. They indicate that all states must create a definition for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And these are for states that adopt alternate assessments based on alternate achievement standards. Therefore, the MCAS alt is our alternate assessment, and it's based on alternate achievement standards. So as part of this, what we did is we got together with a variety of stakeholder groups, members of our colleagues, and looked at other states and discussed what are our needs here, what would be considered a comprehensive definition for students with the most significant disabilities. So we looked at that, and we also looked at guidance from IDA that states state definition of students with the most significant disabilities have to address factors related to cognitive functioning and adaptive behavior. So we're required to have this definition, and we have stakeholder input for this definition, and we're required to have information that address cognitive functioning and adaptive behavior. So all this came together, working together with our colleagues, our stakeholders for the past several months, working to develop a definition, a criteria that would help, we feel, provide some guidance to IEP teams making these important decisions of what type of assessment a student should take. How are they going to participate in MCAS testing? As we remember, it's not a question of whether or not students participate, but it's a question of how all students will participate in assessment, because it's an opportunity for parents and for students to receive feedback on the progress regarding the curriculum frameworks. Move on to the next slide. So here is a reference of this definition. There's 5 parts to it. I certainly don't have to read the whole thing, but I can summarize it to you today. And this will be available on our website, coming shortly in publications. I just want to give everyone a preview that this will be happening in the fall, and we're going to provide a lot of guidance to the teams. It's important to remember that each part of this definition comes together. So what I mean by that is that for a student to be considered a student with the most significant cognitive disabilities, they have to meet all 4 criteria. They have to have systematic delays in attaining age-level academic achievement, have cognitive disabilities that impact their educational performance. They have to require direct and individualized instruction, and they need substantial supports. And probably the most significant aspect that will affect teams and how they look at these students is that these students should be assessed and evaluated on levels of cognitive functioning and adaptive behavior, meaning that for students to fit this criteria, they have to demonstrate a level of performance at least 2 standard deviations below the mean in cognitive functioning and adaptive behavior. And we provide some information on adaptive behavior, adaptive skills such as daily living skills, communications, self-care, and academic skills. We'll move on to the next slide. So what are some resources? What do we can consider for adopting this definition going forward? How can we provide guidance? We anticipate that all teams who are making decisions for the 2024 MCAS will use this criteria to determine whether these students should participate in the MCAS alt based on alternate achievement standards. MCAS participation is a yearly decision, meaning that how the students participate. So at annual IEP team meetings, it is one of the criteria that teams will review and discuss, and they'll use this new definition. We anticipate that there's going to be some questions from districts on this process. It's going to require some training, and we fully anticipate providing as much training and support to schools regarding this process. The MCAS educators, or the educators manual for the MCAS alt, is going to provide a lot of information on this, how to use this criteria, some additional resources that will be available by the latest in August. We're going to have the MCAS Accessibility and Accommodation Manual also describe this definition and provide some guidance for teams. In our training materials, on our MCAS alt web pages, we're going to have an FAQ, and we're going to provide opportunities for educators and trainings so they can get additional guidance on how to adopt this definition and how to work with their teams so they're making sure we're making the best decisions. Again, what this comes down to is that when we assign a student an alternate assessment based on alternate achievement standards, it's a very significant decision, because basically what we're saying is this may delay their graduation. We want to provide as many students as opportunities as possible to move forward to the standard test, because the plan is we have expectations that the majority of our students, the vast majority of our students with special needs, will be able to meet the graduation requirement in a certain pathway and attain their high school diploma.
Excellent. Robert, this is so informative and helpful to know that, at the end, we are releasing this new definition. It's forthcoming. I think today is really just our purpose is introducing this, orienting special education directors to this information, knowing that more resources will come. I don't see a lot of questions coming in just yet, so I really want to pose to the special education directors, when Robert and Jamie and Deborah Hand and others of us have looked at this, like Robert said, we think that the big change is that in order to be able to, be recommended for the alt, for a team to decide that the alt is the right choice for a student, the student would have to meet all 4 of these criteria. And just like Robert said, we think that, the one that might be a change is if you aren't commonly assessing students, particularly students who might have the most significant cognitive disabilities, using a cognitive functioning and adaptive behavior test, that could be a change. And so I would really appreciate, our purpose in coming here today is, like we said, to introduce this, and Robert and Deborah and others will be developing resources for you. I would love to know in the Q&A, if you wouldn't mind, just let us know, is this a big change? How significant is it for you that you would need to be doing, both your school psychologist would need to be doing, likely your school psychologist would need to be doing both cognitive functioning and adaptive behavior assessments. We'll get to the Q&A at the end if there are specific questions, but we actually hope that anything that you tell us that you need, even if we don't answer the questions today, we want to answer them through our FAQ. So please let us know if you have any questions about this change, about our implementation of this new definition. We want to be able to support you with, this evolution in how we approach the alt going forward. But Robert, Deborah, anything that you'd want to add as we kind of conclude for today on this topic?
Deb, did I cover everything as our MCAS alt, extraordinaire manager in your experience? Anything you want to make sure everyone is aware of?
No, I think you covered it quite well. Thank you. We're always here to help. So I think that you pointed that out. We're available anytime they need assistance.
Yeah. All right. And thanks for the opportunity, Russell. It was important
Yes,
that
thank you.
we had this opportunity to share this with everyone and make sure that they know this is a new change and we're here to support them. Thank you.
Definitely. Absolutely. Thank you both. All right. So I'm really excited to go on now to our topic of our early literacy screening guidance. In a minute, I'm going to turn the microphone over to my esteemed colleagues, Catherine and Linda. And Catherine, I'll ask you to introduce both you and Linda. But so that I don't interrupt Catherine as she gets started in our presentation today, I just want to give you a little bit of background real quick on what we are attempting to do here today. So we did just recently release the guidance that we will review with you today. I want to tell you about how we're approaching this. And I really appreciate Catherine and Linda for frankly pushing me on this to say, this is work that has been done at DESE across general education and special education. It's really all of our teams together. And so we are all 3 presenting today. Catherine's going to start by talking to you, kind of orienting you to a lot of what's in the guidance. I'm going to show you the guidance document. And I'm really excited that Linda will come on to talk about the resources and next steps related to the guidance and other supports we have for you. As you are listening to us here at the end of the school year, we're not trying to solicit that flight or fight instinct. We're not trying to solicit, a strong negative reaction to this requirement that's going into effect on July 1st. What we want to solicit from you is prioritization, for you to be listening and thinking about what changes might you need to make to your screening assessments in order to fully implement this new regulation that, like I said, goes into effect on July 1st. And I'm really pleased that I see my colleague, Shelley St. George here, who I used to work with in West Springfield. Shelley was the principal of our all kindergarten school. So all of the 5- and 6-year-olds in West Springfield go to a kindergarten school. And way back in the day, the state came out with a new statewide screener that was expected to be used in all kindergarten classrooms. And as I look back on my work as a superintendent, when I was superintendent at that time, when that screener came into being, a mistake that I made was not to do the prioritization that we're asking you to do today, to think about what do I need to get rid of? What are maybe some of the old screeners that we're using that are no longer as effective as we need them to be, right? They had a time and a place. They do some work for us, but in order to really respect teaching and learning, teachers' time, maybe we need to be thinking about, to bring in something new, what do we actually need to get rid of? And at the time, the mistake that I made was to overlay an additional screener without sort of asking, what should we be getting rid of? And it was a little difficult for me to see kindergarten teachers cry as a result, not a high moment in my career. So I want you to avoid what I went through as superintendent, to be thinking about as you're listening to us today, thinking about, what are the changes we might need to make to the screeners themselves, to the frequency with which we implement them, how we review the information from the screeners, how we communicate with families. There's a lot of next steps, but I think the most important thing to do is to prioritize which next step does your school or district need to take on in order to effectively implement these the new requirements and our guidance. So, Catherine, really happy to turn it over to you for introductions, and then I'll be glad to advance your slides.
Thank you so much, Russell, for the intro and for this opportunity. My name is Catherine Tarka. As Russell mentioned, I'm the director of the Office of Literacy and Humanities here at DESE. And in just a moment, you'll meet my colleague, Linda Sunarine, who's the Assistant Director of the Office of Literacy. And I want to say good morning to everyone that's here today. And thank you for being here. I'm really excited to provide you some highlights about the state's new requirements for early literacy universal screening. After I provide a really brief overview and some highlights of hot topics, Russell, as he mentioned, will go through a more detailed look at the guidance, information, and resources that are available to you. So let's go to the first slide. As some of you here today may already know, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education recently amended our state special education regulations to add an early literacy screening requirement, which goes into effect this July 1st, 2023. This amendment was developed in consultation with caregivers, educators, advocates, and literacy specialists, some of whom are on this call today. The new regulation has 3 components that I want to go over. The components include assessment, instructional response, and family communication. So as you can see, the regulation requires that all students in grades K-3 be assessed at least 2 times per year using an early literacy universal screening instrument that has been approved by the department. And I'll go over what those are in just a moment. The regulation also requires that for students who are scoring significantly below relevant benchmarks, that their school plan instruction that meets the student's needs, as well as look at and determine whether there's a need for progress monitoring. And finally, there's a family communication component. So the new regulation requires that if a student is found to be significantly below relevant benchmarks, that within 30 days, the student's family or caregiver is informed of that result and is offered the opportunity for a follow-up discussion. Let's go to the next slide. I want to take a moment to talk about why screening is so important. Yes, it's required, but we also believe it is best for students that they are offered the opportunity to participate in a well-developed screening process. We believe it's a really important part of an equitable, culturally and linguistically sustaining literacy approach that will match evidence-based instruction and supports to students' assets and needs. So important to note first that early literacy screening is proactive. The purpose of it is to gather information on predictive literacy skills, making it possible to identify whether a student is at risk of experiencing reading difficulties now or in the future, including but not limited to risk of dyslexia, so that the screening process and the data that comes out of it allows educators to understand students' assets in literacy development as well as any needs, provide targeted instruction and support at the first indication that a student may be experiencing reading challenges or may be on track to experience reading challenges. And within a multi-tiered system of support model, educators can use this data to really plan their core instruction, as well as any differentiated instruction or interventions, things like pacing, intensity, and also to determine if additional assessment may be needed. We, under this regulation, will be supporting all schools to use a validated assessment tool, which we believe really promotes equity by reducing the likelihood that any student who needs support may be inadvertently missed or overlooked, and also ensuring that a student who doesn't actually have a reading difficulty will be reducing the likelihood that a student who doesn't have a reading difficulty will be labeled as such. And the recommended process that we're going to talk about today promotes early and proactive communication with families, which we believe is so important, whether or not a child is experiencing any reading difficulty. Let's go to the next slide. As I mentioned earlier, schools are now going to be required to use a screening assessment that is approved by DESE. We believe that the majority of schools in our state are already using one of the approved assessments, either standing alone or within a battery of other approved assessments. So you may already be using something on this list. But currently there are 8 approved assessments for early literacy screening. 3 on the left fully meet DESE's criteria and expectations. And there are 5 additional assessments on the right that partially meet our expectations. Whether meeting or partially meeting, all of the assessments on this list are considered approved. And you can get full information on how these assessments were evaluated and what we looked at in order to determine approval, as well as the advantages and disadvantages of each one on our website. And we provide a lot of information about each of these assessments to hopefully be useful in supporting you to choose an assessment out of these 8 that best fits your needs and your local context. Next slide. Another thing I mentioned earlier is that schools are going to be required to take special steps anytime a student is found to be, quote, significantly below relevant benchmarks for age typical development in literacy skills. These steps include determining an appropriate instructional plan, determining whether progress monitoring is necessary, as well as communicating the screening results to the caregivers. We have started to be asked a lot exactly how a school should determine if a student is, quote, significantly below relevant benchmarks. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. DESE recommends using the 25th percentile or less metric to define the category of significantly below relevant benchmarks. So this is not specifically defined in the regulation, but our recommendation is to use the 25th percentile as a cutoff. Each of the DESE approved screening assessments demarcates this cutoff in a unique way. So for some assessments that will be called at risk. For some assessments, the student's report will indicate that the student is flagged. But details are provided depending on which assessment you're using, how to determine whether the student is at or below that 25th percentile cutoff. And finally, we have also started to often be asked to clarify what type of parent communication is required under this regulation. So according to the regulation, within 30 days of a screening result that is significantly below relevant benchmarks, the school must inform the parent or guardian of the result, inform the parent or guardian of the school's instructional response, and offer the parent or guardian the opportunity for a follow-up discussion. And while schools are required to share this information only with families of students who score significantly below benchmarks, our recommendation is that schools inform all families of their child's screening result, because we believe this promotes open and proactive communication with all families about their students' academic progress. There are sample family letters available for communicating with families throughout the process. These are located inside the guidance document that was shared with you in the chat and that Russell's going to overview in just a moment. I want to be clear that these are samples. They're provided as resources. It's not required to use these specific letters, but we hope they're helpful for you. They're available, editable, and they're going to be provided, translated into our top languages as well. Okay, so now that I've given some brief highlights, I do want to turn it over to Russell to give a more in-depth walkthrough of the guidance. And then after he does that, we'll go to my colleague, Linda, to share some resources and support that's available.
Excellent. Thanks, Catherine. And Catherine, let me just double check that you're seeing the guidance on the screen.
Yep, looks good.
Perfect. All right. Great. Well, thanks, Catherine. I really appreciate that. And like I said, when we planned this, we thought it would be great for Catherine to give you that overview. And then for me to just, as I often do when we produce new guidance, just actually show it to you, because I want this to be your resource, what you come back to get the information that you need. I think those slides would also be useful maybe for making a presentation to your own team, for example. But at the end of the day, we hope that, you know, a little bit more orientation to the document itself will just help you continue to use it as a resource in the future. We know you're busy. We know it's hard to take the time to read through the whole thing. So if I just give you a quick overview of what's in here, maybe you'll know where to go to quickly in the future to get what you need. So just want to highlight the sections that we have, you know, just starting with how we select an assessment, how we think about the connection with dyslexia risk, family communication, the types of supports like professional development that we recommend to be provided, as well as how we fit this in with an MTSS model. And then finally, I'll just quickly show you those family letters in the appendix. So as I always do, I've just kind of highlighted a few things to point out. One of the key things is that I really see this guidance as just nestled really closely with our dyslexia guidelines. And so would encourage you to read both and look at both. Some of the feedback that we got when developing this was, the dyslexia guidelines, is that all about children with dyslexia? And it's not. Those of you who are familiar with it know that it's about how do we understand reading difficulties that in some cases lead to dyslexia, and then what to do about it if a child is identified as having dyslexia. But all of the kind of lead up and the kind of the screening and the progress monitoring that needs to be done is well described in our dyslexia guidelines. And so I just encourage you to look at them in conjunction with each other. And so, appreciate the information that we have just to make that connection. The selection and screening of the actual instruments to be able to be used. What I'm really excited about our guidance, Catherine showed the 8 approved screeners on that slide. They're also listed here, just in the same format as what you just looked at in terms of meeting expectations and partially meeting expectations. And our team is strongly committed to updating this. As new screeners are approved, we will add them to this list. We will keep this document timely and relevant for you as we go forward. Just want to mention that, if I'm thinking about picking up this guidance document, and if I maybe am using one of these screeners already, but have questions about it, or maybe I'm not using one of these screeners, a key consideration is, do I want to use a computer adaptive screener or a screener that is not computer adaptive? And, if I was in your shoes trying to make that decision, I thought these call out boxes might be helpful to you to be thinking about essentially the pros and cons, the benefits of using one or the other. No one right answer, but just something to consider as you're, again, prioritizing and deciding where you need to go next. The other thing that I think is important is just thinking about your timeline and scheduling. I do appreciate this sample timeline for which screeners to use at which, how many times during the year, what intervals, what months. And as is also elaborated on in the dyslexia guidelines, we talk about, which skills should be assessed. So if we take kindergarten, maybe the screeners happening in November and May, what should be included in the beginning of year, end of year assessments for those students? Which skills are we trying to screen for? And so just appreciate that we know what those key skills are that need to be measured during those intervals. Then appreciate this call out about multilingual learners and considerations there. And really this emphasis, because this is a question that comes up a fair amount. When we say screening for all students, do we include multilingual learners? Very much yes. And what I appreciate about this section is the way that it sort of stresses using a kind of triaging information, using information from various sources in order to determine whether or not a multilingual learner is truly showing signs of reading difficulty. And so there are great ideas here about how do you triage information? How do you use various sources of information for making that determination? Similarly, for students with disabilities, same idea, all means all, we're screening all students. I think what's important about this section that I think might be useful to you is to know what are the allowable accommodations for the screener that you're using. And I like this box here that shows, you can link right to the information from the companies themselves about what the accommodations are that should be provided. And I think there just, obviously needs to be some good thinking about how we use accommodations during screenings as well. I've already mentioned the connection to our dyslexia guidelines. And really just, what I always want to remind all of us of is that through the special education eligibility determination process, we can and should identify when dyslexia exists, and we should be able to name dyslexia as part of the a determination of a specific learning disability when that is in fact the type of learning disability that a student has. And so again, I think everything here can, in some cases lead up to that for students for whom that type of disability is the right determination. I appreciate all the work our team did to create the family communication materials. And so if you don't use our sample letters, or if you're looking at our sample letters, just know that, we've got any sample letter we hope covers these categories that you see on the left-hand side of this table. And then just some other resources that you might find helpful. Ideas for professional development that educators might need to be able to effectively not only just implement the screeners, but analyze and understand the results, to interpret the data, and then to use the data for planning purposes. And as always, how we engage with our families. So just some ideas for professional development and, connecting to, as the next topic, really connecting to MTSS. Catherine, when we think about MTSS through a tiered systems of support, when you do identify, which students need tier 2 or tier 3. And so the slide that Catherine showed that illustrates how we understand which students might be significantly below based on the screener that we're using, I think is just, well articulated here. So if you were thinking like, oh, that was interesting what Catherine showed, I want to know more about it, here's where it is in our guidance under the MTSS section. And I hope you find that useful as you use this resource. I'm getting towards the end, but I am just want to point out that the family letters that Catherine showed on the screen are included as appendices or in Appendix A. And just note that, they fall into different categories. So maybe the first one is just about introducing the idea that we are going to have screening this year, that there's a schedule. This is when it's going to occur, because I think it'd be good for parents to have that heads up, to know that screening is going to happen. So they're not sort of caught off guard if they happen to be one of the parents who's notified that their child began to exhibit some literacy difficulties, some reading difficulties as a result of the screener. We also, like I mentioned earlier, that decision about, are you using a computer adaptive test or not? So we have a letter if you're using a computer adaptive test, or if you are using a non-computer adaptive test. So again, just hope that differentiation is useful to you as you go about communicating with families. And then finally, how do we sort of carefully word that letter to families and that communication to families? Like Catherine mentioned, there's not a requirement that it has to be a letter, but we do think that, perhaps using these sample letters, hopefully we have tried to hit the right tone, the right note with families, so as to, make sure that they're well informed, but not frightened by this information, because it's a journey. Not all students who are identified as being at risk early on will definitely have disabilities later. And so we want to make sure we just, talk about what is the support and intervention we're going to provide. How are we going to monitor progress, so that the parents know that, the school's on top of this, that you're working on this, like we know you are. So that's really what we wanted to be able to show as the resource itself. Again, I hope that just brief orientation just helps you know where to go, how to use the resource in the future, and being able to make it as usable and accessible as possible as we go forward. Let me go back to presentation mode and welcome Linda to come on screen and talk about how we will further support you as we go forward. And let me check to see if you're having any difficulty.
I can't turn my screen on, but you can hear my voice.
All right, let me help with that. Go ahead though.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Linda Sunarine. Oh, and here is start my video.
Great.
Hello. I'm our Assistant Director of Literacy, and I'm really excited to be here to give a friendly face. I think a lot of people echoed before, our whole team is here to support you. And so I hope you walk away knowing what your resources are and like who to reach out to is. So to start off with, we have 2 helpful resources to support educator teams with selecting a screening assessment that is just right for you, or for learning more about the assessment that you're already using that's in place. So below the guidance on the website that is been shared in the chat, you'll see that there is each approved screener, and then there are highlights, challenges, and considerations. There's a lot of great information there, including specific subtest information, which is on the minds of a lot of people, especially as you look through some of those recommendations on skills to assess that we saw earlier. Another helpful document linked in the guidance and above the approved assessment, so linked in many places, is our at a glance document, which really goes over all of the different features, including some of the technical aspects like timing, the type of PD that's available, and that is to help you also think about what is going to match your needs and your local context. So we hope those two documents are really useful in thinking about what screening assessment is going to be the best fit for you. We can go to the next slide. To support all districts and schools with their questions on specific screeners, the regulation, timelines, we'll be running screening office hours, which are linked on the guidance website. And we're going to run them through the summer, through the fall, through the spring, and as long as they're needed. And in addition to that, we are working on a suite of screening plug and play resources. These resources will support districts with a comprehensive early literacy universal screening protocol. You can imagine slide decks and educator supports that have embedded trainings, embedded mini webinars for professional development that will be released throughout the summer and the fall. And the topics will line up to that page that Russell highlighted that had all of the different topics recommended to support everyone in your community with the regulation.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Linda. So I'm pleased that we have a little more than 10 minutes for Q&A.